We are blessed in British Columbia with people of immense talent and determination who have given so much back to our province. Stephanie Cadieux is one of those individuals. Paralyzed in an accident at 18, she adopted the philosophy of her dad, who said, "We are not going to concentrate on what you can't do, but what you can." Elected as an MLA in 2009, Stephanie became the first person using a wheelchair to sit in the BC cabinet. She also happened to be the youngest person around that table. Serving in many ministries, she took on the exceptionally challenging role of Minister of Children and Family Development at a difficult time. In recognition of her many accomplishments, Stephanie has now been named Canada's very first Chief Accessibility Officer. Her story is both moving and inspiring. Congratulations on your newest position as the Accessibility Chief Officer for Canada. It's fantastic. Before we talk about that and what it encompasses, though, you and I have some shared joys in our lives in politics.
Sure do.
Why did you go into politics in the first place?
Interesting question. I think I always had an interest. Interested, right when I was a high school student, interested in what was going on and how things worked. I actually went to university thinking I'd probably go into law. But I don't think I ever considered a political career. I don't know, it seemed very foreign in a way. But as I proceeded through my career as an adult, I was doing more and more work with governments at various levels because of advocacy work I was doing for people with disabilities. And I realized I wasn't a very good advocate in the traditional sense, because I wasn't aggressive enough. I was too pragmatic about what was realistically possible, and so I thought, well, maybe I'd do better changing things from the inside. And eventually, that thought met with, I guess, the right timing, and
the opportunity.
And the opportunity arose. Yeah.
In your last day, in your last speech in the legislature, you talked about you had seen the best and the worst of this House. Mm-hmm. So let's start with the best. What was the best?
Working together and getting things done, finding agreement, finding, across the floor, agreement on issues, and commitment to finding, a solution everybody could be comfortable with.
I think we probably all know what the worst was. It was when you're Minister of Family and Children, and unfortunately a young man committed suicide, and that came right on your plate.
Yeah, and I think, the criticism of in that role then as minister is fair. It's criticism of policy, criticism of the situation is completely fair. What I feel was the worst, and what I don't feel is right, is when folks make it personal, and they make it about me, the individual, versus me in a role, and where they can't differentiate anymore and use it for political gain. It's just wrong. It's a difficult file, and the ministers before me and the ministers after me will have the same experience. It is not a happy file a lot of the time. And when there are happy moments, generally doesn't get any media attention.
How did you cope with that? Do you have some sort of screen that protects you?
Thick skin. Of course it affects you. But I had a job to do. and I took the job really seriously, I knew what it was about. I knew it was about political gain, because the same people, saying nasty things or being aggressive against or towards me, calling for my resignation, were the same people that in the hallway were, "Hello, how are you doing? How's your day?" There is such a falseness to some of what happens in the legislature, especially at question period time, that you really have to just try and remember that, because if you didn't, it would really be difficult, and it was difficult. But I have family and friends who I look to as my compass, and I check in with, and I was okay with them, so that was okay.
And turn off the social media.
That's a whole other new world, and a whole other new area that adds a whole new level of complexity to doing the job or to being involved in the political arena, public life in any form, I would say. And it's not all good. And I don't know that we're putting enough focus on reminding ourselves that we have to be critical thinkers, and that not everything we read or see should be taken at face value.
Well, now you've turned an interesting corner, and you are Canada's first Chief Accessibility Officer. That's a real compliment, and it comes, of course, in part through your lived experience. Mm-hmm. You know the situation and the issues. How old were you when you had your accident?
18. Yeah, I was in my second semester of university. It was, that's a long time ago now.
Turned your life upside down.
It did in a moment, yeah, really did. And it's something that, in a moment turns your life upside down, makes you reevaluate everything. And you're forced to restructure your life and relearn so much. It also teaches you a lot of other life lessons, who your friends are, what's important. In some ways, it's a real gift.
Well, now you have this opportunity to actually define the word accessibility, because there's never been an officer in charge before. So you see it as more than just the physical form and challenges. Tell me what you think about this position.
I think the work I've done through my whole adult life, intentionally or not, has led me to this. And I feel very honored to take on the role as the first Chief Accessibility Officer. There's still a lot of work to do. In the 30 years-ish since my injury, some things have changed, but not nearly enough. In some ways, I think we actually have kind of stalled or even gone backwards. We got to a place, I think, where, early on in my injury, as a person with a disability, felt we were pretty lucky to live where we did in Canada. We were, sort of leading. We got pretty complacent with that. And the rest of the world has caught up, some cases gone further than us, on inclusion and on what accessibility means. And it certainly isn't just what people think of first when you say the word. You say the word, you think accessibility, you think, oh, right, ramps, washrooms. But it's so much more than that. And the barriers that exist for people with disabilities, whether they be people with physical disabilities, whether they be people with cognitive limitation or disability, or other invisible disabilities. The barriers are put up because we largely as a society, have an ableist view. And we still, to this day, often, whether it be conscious or unconscious, think of disability as less and something that needs to be overcome. We don't think about it in the way that we should, and the way that the Accessible Canada Act is now forcing organizations to look at it. And that is that the barriers exist in the built environment and in the world because people aren't thinking about the full range of human experience and including all of that. Everyone, if you are fortunate enough to live long enough, will experience some form of disability. And some of us experience through larger parts of our life, and some in more ways than one. And it is not up to the individual to overcome their disability, to do things, to be involved, to exert their citizenship. It's up to the environment to ensure they can. And that means looking at and ensuring that barriers don't exist in the first place. So there's a fair ways to go. Autism, the spectrum of autism, neurodiversity, dyslexia, other examples. Somebody who's deaf or hard of hearing, somebody who's blind or partially sighted, or a combination of all of these things. They may have had a physical disability from birth, or may have Down syndrome, or may, like myself, be injured at some point in their life and be an amputee, or have a spinal cord injury. This range of experience of the human condition is very broad. And if we're not considering the needs of all of these groups when we're designing, when we're building, when we're presenting programs, services, products, then we're essentially disadvantaging a large section of the population. 1 in 5 identify as having some disability. That's an awful lot of the population to leave out.
It seems to me your opportunity is to be a storyteller, because people are not, I don't think they have any ill will about this. Mm-hmm. They just haven't personally experienced it, so they've not thought about it. For instance, with autism, a child going through security at the airport and told roughly, take your shoes off, leave your phone here, walk through that by yourself, and they can't cope.
Right.
That's something that most people wouldn't have experienced or thought about. But if you can tell those stories for each of the areas you've been talking about, it brings it to life for people.
Absolutely. I also, Pollyanna, rose-colored glasses or not, I don't believe that people intentionally exclude, at least not most of the time. I do agree, mostly it's just a lack of understanding, a lack of knowledge, lack of experience. And fair enough. I am not an expert in the areas of disability that I do not personally experience. I am learning, I have learned, I know more than the average person. I think I could say I know what I don't know, which is probably more than most. But you're right, my job is largely storytelling. It's questioning, it's challenging, encouraging. It's allowing or ensuring that the conversation about accessibility is front and center, challenging organizations to do the work they need to do internally, whether that be individually as individuals and members of organizations need to do the work themselves to examine their bias, to educate, but also organizationally to look at where are the barriers that exist in their organizations, their programs, their services.
So it sounds to me you're approaching this position by saying, well, first of all, I've got to educate myself up with consultations and talking to people, but then the awareness in public of the scope of this is your next step.
Absolutely. But it's also broader, because a barrier-free Canada won't stop because the federal government has become barrier-free. It'll be when society broadly has embraced this, this ideal, this understanding, when we've expanded it to all of the provinces and territorial governments and the municipalities and the private sector at the broadest level has sort of gone, aha. And that's happening. I think we're at an interesting point in time around the world. These conversations are happening. These, laws are being enacted. Things are changing. Conversations are changing. Companies are taking a new approach, looking at, what can they do to improve their product packaging. Got the fashion industry, the makeup giants of the world are looking at how do they ensure that their product packaging and their product applicators work for people with disabilities too. It's really quite fascinating, the time that we're in. It's encouraging, to say the least. I think while there is a lot to do, there's also a lot of progress being made. As we see more representation in film and television, people learn by seeing. Sometimes people are uncomfortable with someone with disability because they've just never experienced it before. So they need that opportunity, and if they've experienced it now because of something they've seen on TV or a character that they like, someone on the news that they respect, well, that's good. That will help. It all comes together in the end.
So what power do you have in this position?
Influence, I would say. I have influence inside the federal government and with the ministers. It's my job to tell them what's working, what's not working, and how do we improve what's necessary. It's going to be a work in progress, as I say. The organizations will do their work. Sometimes they will ask for my advice or input. Sometimes they won't. But it's my job to sort of keep an eye at the 40,000 foot level of all of the work that's going on inside the federal government, the federally regulated sectors, and beyond, what's happening in other parts of the world that might influence what Canada does or should do, and to advise.
Let's look at your personal journey. Such an interesting life. How have you changed, do you think?
I don't know. One of the things that I tried very much not to do when I went into politics was to change who I was. And I hope that I haven't in any negative way. I hope that I've grown, and I probably have. It's my nature to just say yes to things and to try and hope that things work out. I'm a bit of an adventurer that way, I guess. I haven't set out to do any of the things I've done so much as opportunity presented itself, something needed doing, somebody asked me to do something and I said yes. I think I'm going to keep doing that.
And you're willing to take risks even if it might not work or there might be some failure along the way.
There's no reward without risk. And I am comfortable with risk. I have an entrepreneurial spirit. I started an online retail business in 1999, which was terribly unsuccessful. I was a few years ahead of my time for online retail, but it was a great experience. You always learn something.
Yeah, I think that is that resilience and the willing to pick yourself up and give it another go is an undercurrent for most successful people.
You have to, I think. be willing to take risk. Calculated, perhaps, risk. Change isn't always easy. Some people are more comfortable with it than others. I'm quite comfortable with change. I think it's important. As a minister, I pushed for changes, some that probably policymakers in the bureaucracy and at the cabinet table were a little uncomfortable with, but they worked out, thankfully. But I think we have to push ourselves individually and collectively.
What has been the highlight for you?
Taking on this role probably is the highlight. I really feel like I was meant to do it. Now I've got, 2.5 more years to prove that it was that I was the right person to pick. But I feel like it's really valuable, not just to me, but definitely to me. But that I have an opportunity to really help make a change for people that will impact their lives in a positive way.
Where does all this positivity and optimism come from, do you think? Was it your parents, spirituality, meditation?
I think my parents, or, just my being generally. I'm an optimist, I'm positive. I don't think I was ever allowed not to be. And when I was first injured, pretty emotionally tied up by that. And I know, my dad said to my mom, we're not going to focus on what she can't do, we're going to focus on what she can do. And I know that their outlook affected how I felt in that moment. And at least probably somewhat said, gave to me, I guess I have to, have to move forward. But there's so much to be positive about. It doesn't mean that there aren't difficult moments. It doesn't mean whether that be in your private life or your public life, doesn't mean there aren't difficult moments or challenges. But challenges are part of the fun. I like a good challenge.
Well, thank you for taking on this latest, biggest challenge. We wish you well, and we'll watch closely.
Thank you.
Stephanie Cadieux, a BC legend.